We just needed your credit, not you. That's what my grandson said to my face, standing in my own living room, with his hands shoved in his pockets like he was delivering a weather report. No hesitation, no flicker of shame. The words hung in the air like frost, sharp and heavy, and I felt them settle in my bones. My name is Helen Carter. I'm 72 years old, and for 46 of those years I was a corporate accountant. I've worked with balance sheets bigger than the annual budget of this whole town. I know what it means when numbers don't add up, but nothing in my decades of catching fraud in spreadsheets prepared me for the arithmetic of betrayal coming from someone I helped raise. Ethan didn't even look me in the eye after he said it. He was scanning his phone, nodding at some notification. The late autumn light spilled through my front windows, catching the dust in the air, and for a moment, I just stood there, watching the particles drift like the remnants of something burned away. I'd invited him over because I thought we'd talk about his latest job search. He's 24, restless, and I'd told myself his distance lately was just the usual friction between generations. But instead, he arrived with a manila folder and an offhand declaration that my signature had helped secure something important for the family. When I asked what he meant, he sighed like I was a stubborn child. Then came that line, "We just needed your credit, not you," as if my worth could be distilled into a credit score and a social security number. He slid the folder onto my coffee table. It was heavy with paper. The folder sat there while my mind ticked through the familiar hum of calculations. How many accounts do I still have open? Which ones could be leveraged without my consent? I'd always kept my finances neat, not out of fear, but out of habit, the way some people iron their linens or polish their silver. Ethan started talking again, but my ears were ringing too loudly to catch every word. I caught fragments: bridge loan, short-term, investment opportunity. The language was slick, the kind of phrasing I'd seen 100 times from contractors, padding invoices or suppliers inflating costs. I picked up the folder. Inside were photocopies of property records I recognized instantly, or thought I did. My late husband's name, mine beneath it, and a legal description of land out by Miller's Creek. That land hadn't been touched in decades. It was scrub oak, brittle grass, and the memory of picnics we'd had there when our boy, Michael, was still small enough to carry on my hip. But something was wrong. The parcel number looked off by a digit, a single digit, but enough to shift boundaries. And the date next to my husband's signature, that date was burned into my memory, because it was the day before he went into the hospital for the last time. I remembered what his signature looked like then. Shaky, yes, but deliberate. On this page, the loops and lines were too smooth, too confident. Ethan reached for the folder, maybe to close it before I saw more, but I held on. My accountants I had already locked onto the irregularity. Years of catching altered ledgers had trained me to spot the faint difference between ink from a pen that's been sitting in a drawer and one bought the same week. "You're making that face," Ethan muttered, as if my expression was an inconvenience. "Don't overthink it, Grandma. This is just business. Just business." I'd heard that phrase before in conference rooms where someone was about to lose their job. In courtrooms where companies wriggled out of paying damages. It was a shield people used when they didn't want to admit they'd crossed a line. I set the folder down carefully. My hands were steady, but only because I'd trained them to be. "Does your father know about this?" I asked. Ethan smirked, a little sideways pulled at his mouth that didn't belong to him. It belonged to Michael. Of course, he set it up. That was the moment I felt the floor tilt, not in some poetic way, but literally. My knees softened and I had to reach for the edge of the table. Michael had been busy lately, traveling, closing deals, too busy to stop by for Sunday dinner. I'd told myself it was just life moving fast. But if he was part of this, then my absence from his life wasn't neglect. It was strategy. Ethan checked his watch. "Look, I gotta go. Just keep the papers safe, okay? Someone from the bank might call you to confirm a few details. Just say yes to whatever they ask. It's all set up." He left without hugging me, without even glancing back. The door closed with a solid thud that made the pendulum in the grandfather clock by the wall tremble. That clock had been my husband's pride, a retirement gift from his crew. Its brass pendulum swung in a slow, even arc, marking seconds I suddenly felt I didn't have to waste. I stood there a long while, listening to the tick-tock. My reflection in the glass panel was warped slightly, my face stretched by the curve of the wood. I thought about the keyhole at the base, the tiny brass key I kept in the kitchen drawer, the compartment behind the clock face where I'd once hidden the boys' Christmas gifts when they were little. My husband had used it too, though he'd never told me for what. I went to the kitchen, poured myself coffee I didn't really want, and tried to make sense of the situation. My credit, my name, my husband's land, all woven into something I hadn't agreed to, and my own grandson delivering the news like a courier for a company I'd never hired, through the window above the sink. I could see the last leaves clinging to the maple in the yard. A gust of wind sent a few spinning down, scattering across the grass. The branches looked stripped, exposed. I understood that feeling. I thought about calling Michael right then, but the image of him picking up, hearing the polite pause before his voice slid into business mode, stopped me. If this was just business to him, then calling wouldn't change anything. Not yet. Instead, I went back to the living room and pulled the folder toward me again. I leafed through each page slowly, memorizing dates, parcel numbers, and the notary's name in the corner. Some of the pages had faint creases, as if they'd been folded and unfolded several times. Others were crisp, freshly printed. The notary stamp caught my eye. It belonged to a woman I knew from church, someone who always brought deviled eggs to the potlucks. I remembered her telling me last year she'd stopped doing notarizations, except for close friends. Apparently, my son qualified. A thin unease settled in my stomach. I'd spent my life knowing that numbers told the truth if you read them right, but here, the numbers were telling a story I hadn't been invited to hear. The clock chimed the hour, the deep, resonant tone vibrating through the floorboards. I glanced at it again, at the little scratch on the brass of the minute hand. My husband had made that scratch himself, the day he moved the clock and nicked it against the doorframe. I remembered him laughing about it, saying it gave the clock character. Now, for some reason, that scratch looked like a mark on a ledger, the kind of mark that could mean an error, or a clue. The sound of Ethan's words replayed in my mind, each time sharper. We just needed your credit, not you. I wondered if he even understood what he'd said, or maybe he understood perfectly. I closed the folder, slid it under the couch cushion, and made a silent decision. I might have been retired for over a decade, but I still knew how to audit a set of books, and how to follow a paper trail, without tipping off the people who didn't want to be found out. I didn't know yet what Michael had told Ethan, or how far this opportunity reached, but I knew this: my credit wasn't the only thing they'd underestimated. The pendulum kept swinging, steady as breath, and for the first time in years, I felt the old rhythm of my work returning. The patience, the precision, the quiet gathering of facts before a confrontation. The leaves outside rattled against the siding as the wind picked up. And I thought about that piece of land by Miller's Creek. I thought about my husband's signature, and I thought about what happens when people forget that the person they're exploiting once spent her life catching other people's lies. The clock ticked on, but I was already counting something else. The folder stayed under my couch cushion for 2 days before I touched it again. In that time, I went about my routines as if nothing had shifted. Morning coffee, grocery runs, calls from a couple of women at church, but I kept hearing Ethan's voice. The way he'd said it wasn't just careless, it was final. It was the kind of statement someone makes when they've already decided what you are to them. On the third morning, my phone rang just as I was rinsing a plate in the sink. Unknown number. I let it buzz twice before I answered. Double quotes, Mrs. Cotter. This is Stephanie from First County Bank. We're finalizing the bridge loan documents. Just wanted to confirm a few details. I set the plate down. The water kept running. What documents? A pause. The kind of pause where you know the other person is flipping through a script in their head. The bridge loan associated with the Miller's Creek parcel. The one your son Michael Carter co-signed. I haven't agreed to any loan, I said. She cleared her throat. Well, ma'am, we do have your signature on file. Michael said you'd be expecting our call. I told her I needed a callback number, wrote it on the back of an old receipt, and hung up before she could try again. My hand was already shaking, not from fear but from calculation. If the bank thought the signature was mine, then the paper in that folder had already been processed. That meant somewhere, in their system, there was a digital copy with a timestamp, a scanned image, and possibly metadata that could tell me more than anyone intended. I didn't call the number back right away. Instead, I called Michael. He answered on the fourth ring. Mom, hey, busy morning. Can we make this quick? I told him about the bank call. I kept my tone flat, the way I used to when presenting bad audit findings to executives who thought they were too important for mistakes. "Oh yeah, that," he said. "Listen, you're overthinking it. It's just a short-term loan to help Ethan get his project moving. The land is collateral, but it's not like anything's going to happen. You've got the best credit in the family, Mom. This helps everyone." I didn't agree to it. "Your family, that's agreement enough." He said it like it was a fact of nature, like gravity or the change of seasons. I heard voices in the background, Claire's, brisk and clear, giving instructions to someone. Michael must have put me on speaker because she cut in. "Helen, it's all perfectly safe," Claire said. "We've handled the payment schedule. You won't have to lift a finger. The documents are standard. No risk at all." "I want to see the originals," I said. There was a stretch of silence, then Claire laughed lightly, the kind of laugh meant to smooth over an edge. "Of course, we'll bring them by next week. Right now, everything's moving fast." Missing the window could cost Ethan the opportunity. I'd heard pitches like this before. Urgency, to keep you from looking too closely. Bring them by today. Michael came back on. "Mom, don't make this complicated. You taught me to seize chances when they come. This is one of them. Trust me." The call ended without my agreeing to anything. But I knew now it wasn't just Ethan improvising. This had been set up, coordinated. Claire's voice in the background wasn't surprise. It was management. And Michael, my son, had decided my consent was a formality he could skip. After lunch, I pulled the folder from under the couch. I laid out every page in neat rows across the dining table. One by one, I photographed them with my phone. Parcel maps, warranty deeds, notarized statements, all with dates in the last 6 weeks. The notary's name appeared more than once. I thought of her at the church potlucks, her careful handwriting on the casserole labels. If she'd stamped these, either she believed they were legitimate or she was in deeper than she should be. I printed out the photos at the drugstore that afternoon, tucking them into an envelope. I didn't want to rely on just digital copies. Paper was harder to erase. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pendulum of the grandfather clock ticked steadily in the dark, and I kept thinking about the compartment inside it. My husband used it for things he didn't want, lying around the house: bonus checks, insurance policies, once even an engagement ring he'd bought for a friend's proposal. I hadn't opened it in years. The key was still in the kitchen drawer under the old church bulletins. I unlocked the panel and ran my hand inside. Just the smooth back of the clock face. Empty. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some note that would explain how my husband's land was now a bargaining chip in a loan I'd never heard about. But there was nothing. The next morning, I called the number the bank rep had given me. A woman picked up, her tone polite but cool. "This is Karen Lopez," she said. "How can I help you, Mrs. Carter?" I told her I wanted to review the documents attached to the loan. She hesitated. "Those are available to the account holders." "I am the account holder," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll need to check with my branch manager. Can I call you back?" Her voice had that tightness I recognized from my own working days, the sound of someone who's just realized the file on their desk isn't as clean as they thought. She promised to return my call by the afternoon. She didn't. At 5:42 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Carter, this is Karen from the bank. I can't discuss this on the record. Call me from a landline tonight after 8. I stared at the message for a long time. My landline hadn't rung more than twice in the past year. Tonight, it would. Dinner was just soup and toast. I didn't feel like cooking. The maple tree outside had shed most of its leaves now. The branches looked skeletal against the deepening sky. At exactly 8, I picked up the landline and dialed the number. Karen's voice was low. "I shouldn't be saying this, but there are inconsistencies in the file. The signature page looks altered, and the collateral description, there's an addendum that doesn't match the county records." I asked if she could send me copies. "Can't, not directly. If you request them through the records department, they'll have to provide them. But Mrs. Carter, you should know, your son's been in here several times this month, and he wasn't alone. Pastor Jacobs came with him once." That name landed heavy. Pastor Ron had been the one to lead my husband's funeral service. He'd spoken about integrity, about building a legacy. Now I wondered what legacy he was helping my son build. I thanked Karen and hung up. The clock in the hall struck the hour. Each chime sounded like a mark against someone I thought I knew. Before bed, I pulled out an old shoebox from the closet. Inside were photographs from the last decade's holidays, graduations, the ordinary afternoons that only seemed important once they'd passed. I stopped at one taken just weeks before my husband died. He was standing next to the grandfather clock, hand on the side, smiling at Ethan, who must have been about 10 then. The clock's minute hand caught the light in the photo, and I saw it clearly, a small diagonal scratch I'd never noticed before. The same scratch was there now. In the picture, the scratch pointed to the tube like an arrow frozen in time. I went back to the table and compared the signature on the loan documents to the one on the back of the photo my husband had signed and dated it for Ethan. The loops in his letters dipped differently in the loan papers. Too smooth, too confident, just like the parcel deed I'd seen. Someone had practiced his name until they could almost make it his. I sat there until the house went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. My son and his wife thought they were operating in shadows. Ethan thought he was just doing a favor for his father. But I had the start of a trail, and I knew how to follow it. By the time I finally went to bed, I'd made a list, not of wasn't calling this a crime yet, but of people who would know pieces of the truth. Karen from the bank, the notary from church, and now, apparently, Pastor Ron. My own son was on the list too, though I didn't write his name. I didn't need to. The clock ticked on in the dark, steady and patient. I could be patient too. I didn't sleep much the night after seeing Michael and Claire. The polite smiles they gave me over dinner had been thin veils over something heavier, something calculated. Ethan's careless words still echoed in my head, and every time they did, my chest tightened. By morning, I had decided I couldn't just sit and wait for answers to fall into my lap. The number I'd called back 2 days earlier, one that had only rung once before someone hung up, was still on my caller ID. I dialed it again, expecting a stranger or a wrong number. Instead, a crisp female voice answered. First Community Bank, this is Karen Lopez. How may I help you? The title caught me off guard. A bank call. I knew that voice familiar from the times I'd been in to deposit checks. Karen, this is Helen Carter. I think you called me the other day. There was a pause, not long enough to be accidental. Yes, Mrs. Carter, I was following up on some account documentation, but it seems it's already been resolved. No action needed on your part. That phrasing made my skin prickle. What documentation? I'm afraid I can't discuss details over the phone for security reasons, she replied smoothly, but there was a tension in her tone. The kind that comes when someone's reading from a script they don't believe in. If you'd like, you can make an appointment to review your file. I told her I'd come in that afternoon. The bank smelled of new carpet and coffee. Karen greeted me at her desk, her smile polite but tight, her eyes flicking to the glass office behind her where the branch manager sat. She printed something from her computer, laid the pages on the desk, and slid them toward me. This is the loan packet we were finalizing last week. You've already signed the agreement. The words "you've already signed" hit me like ice water. My name was there, in neat cursive, but it wasn't my hand. The H in Helen was wrong, the loop too narrow, and the date next to it was 2 weeks ago, a Friday I'd spent at home mending a curtain. I kept my voice level. I didn't sign this. Karen's expression barely shifted, but she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Mrs. Carter, sometimes documentation is completed in stages. If you believe there's an issue, I can escalate this to compliance, but I need you to understand there are other parties involved that can get complicated. Other parties? My pulse thudded, like my son. She didn't confirm, but her silence was an answer. Instead, she tapped the second page of the packet. The collateral listed here, parcel 18B, North Edgewood. Does that look familiar? It did. It was the land my husband, Robert, had inherited from his father. We'd never developed it, just paid the minimal property tax every year. It wasn't in Michael's name. It wasn't in mine either, not exactly. Robert had insisted on keeping it in a trust until we decided what to do with it. How, I asked slowly, is this parcel being used as collateral in my name? Karen's gaze flicked again toward the manager's office. Mrs. Carter, I'm not supposed to advise you, but she slid a yellow sticky note toward me. On it was a handwritten name, Ron Jacobs. Ask him how the deed was amended, and be careful who you trust. I tucked the note into my purse before standing. Thank you, Karen. Her voice followed me quietly. If anyone asks, you came in to update your contact information. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the last of the autumn leaves across the parking lot. I drove home replaying her words. Pastor Ron, our community's moral pillar. The man who'd spoken at Robert's funeral. The idea that he could be tied to this made my stomach twist. At home, I pulled Robert's old file box from the closet. Years of tax returns, insurance policies, property deeds meticulously labeled. The original trust paperwork for Parcel 18B was there, with Robert's precise signature and the witness marks from the notary. The trust had no expiration date. To move the property into my personal name for collateral, someone would have had to alter the deed and bypass the trust entirely. My phone rang. Michael, Mom, Claire and I were thinking you should stay with us for a while, closer to family. His voice was smooth, but too quick, as if rehearsed. I'm fine here, I said. Though I did stop by the bank today. There was a short, dangerous silence. What for? Updating my contact information, I said, matching cover story. He exhaled audibly, then softened his tone. Good, look, the less you stress about finances, the better. We've got everything handled. I ended the call as politely as I could. Then I went to the living room, to the tall grandfather clock Robert had loved. The brass pendulum swung steadily. I opened the side panel to wind it, but my fingers brushed something behind the mechanism, a thin envelope, taped to the wood. It was sealed. Robert's handwriting on the front. For Helen, if things go wrong. I didn't open it yet. Not until I knew exactly what I was facing. But the weight of it in my hand told me Robert had anticipated trouble. The next morning, I decided to follow Karen's lead. I drove to the church, found Pastor Ron in his office, and asked about the trust deed. His smile never faltered, but his eyes hardened a fraction. Oh, that. There was a community development opportunity. Michael approached me for guidance. The paperwork was adjusted to allow flexibility, without me. He folded his hands. You were grieving. Sometimes others must make decisions for the greater good. It took all my control not to show anger. And the greater good is what, exactly, a project that will benefit the town, he said smoothly. Your family included. I left before my voice betrayed me. As I stepped into the cold air, I knew two things. Robert had seen this coming, and the clock's hidden envelope might be the only untainted evidence I had that night. I locked my doors, pulled the curtains, and laid the envelope on the table. Whatever was inside could either confirm my fears or give me a way to fight back. I took a deep breath and began to tear it open. When I tore the envelope open, the first thing that fell onto the table was a small brass key, cold and heavier than it looked. Taped to it was a folded sheet of paper, lined with Robert's tidy handwriting. Beneath the paper lay a worn index card on which he had sketched a crude map of its landmarks and a square marked with an X dot. The letter was short. Helen, if you find this, it means someone has gone after Parcel 18B. There are documents in a safe deposit box, First County Trust, box number 217. The key is here. Do not tell Michael. Give the map to someone you trust completely, and only if you must. I read it twice. Robert's tone was deliberate, almost clinical. He'd seen this coming. He'd left me the tools, but not the comfort. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of a task I hadn't asked for. The name that came to mind wasn't family. It was Linda Brooks. We'd been friends for decades, though the last few years had put distance between us. She'd known Robert almost as long as I had, and she'd been there in those early years when we were still figuring out how to keep the land in the family. If there was someone outside my bloodline who might still act in my interest, it was her. I called her number, half expecting it to have changed. She answered on the third ring. Helen, she said, her voice a mix of surprise and caution. It's been a while. Can we meet somewhere quiet today? She hesitated. Is this about Michael? Her question was so precise it felt like a confirmation. It's about Robert and the land. We met at an old diner off Highway 9. The place hadn't changed in 30 years. Same cracked vinyl booths. Same low hum of fluorescent lights. Linda slid into the booth across from me, her eyes scanning my face before settling on the envelope I'd placed between us. You still have that clock? She asked without touching it. Double quotes, yes. And this was inside. I slid the letter and map toward her. She read silently, her mouth pressing into a thin line. I'm not surprised, she said at last. Robert came to see me 2 weeks before he died. He asked me to hold on to something for him. Said, if you ever came asking, I'd know the time had come. I leaned forward. What did he give you? She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope, the kind you buy when you expect it to hold weight. She placed it on the table but didn't release her grip. Helen, there's more to this than Michael taking advantage. Robert found out the trust paperwork had been tampered with before he passed. He suspected Pastor Ron was involved, some community initiative nonsense, but he didn't know how deep it went. I nodded toward the envelope. And in their copies, she said, of the original trust documents, Robert's will haha, and a notarized statement from him saying he never authorized any changes. He wanted you to have them if someone tried to force your hand. I took the envelope, feeling the edges of the documents inside. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Her eyes softened, but there was regret there too, because I didn't want to believe Michael would go through with it, and because Pastor Ron came to see me after Robert died, asking questions about whether I had any of Robert's papers. I lied. But I knew if I came to you without proof, you'd walk straight to Michael, and he'd talk you out of it. I thought of the conversation at the bank, of Karen sliding that sticky note across the desk. Pieces were aligning, but not yet fitting. I paid for our coffees and told Linda we'd talk again soon. On the drive home, the key in my pocket felt like a live wire. I couldn't risk going to the safe deposit box immediately if Michael had eyes at the bank. He'd know. That night, I made a copy of the map and locked the original with the letter in my desk drawer. I slid the key into the lining of my coat pocket. Then, I called Ethan. When he picked up, his tone was wary. Grandma, I need you to do something for me. Quietly. He didn't answer right away. Is this about the loan? It's about the land. And your father. There was a long exhale. I didn't know they were going to drag you into it like this. I just mentioned your good credit when Dad was talking about financing. I didn't think they'd. Ethan, I cut him off. I don't need excuses. I need you to drive me to First County Trust tomorrow morning. No questions, he agreed. At the bank, the safe deposit clerk asked for my ID and the key. The box was small but heavy, the kind that clinks when you shift it. In the privacy room, I lifted the lid. Inside were 2 leather-bound folders, each labeled in Robert's handwriting, title, history, and financial records. Beneath them lay a single Polaroid photograph, Foppert sitting at a table with a document in front of him, pen in hand. The date stamp was from the week the land deed had supposedly been amended. His watch, the old pendulum clock's twin, was in the frame, the minute hand showing a faint scratch at the 10 mark. I knew that scratch. I'd seen it every day for years, on the clock in my living room. That meant the photo had been staged using the clock as a prop, not taken during the actual signing of any legitimate document. I locked everything back in the box, taking only the photograph and a few key pages from the title history. As we left, Ethan asked, "What now?" "Now," I said, "we find out who benefits from the deed change, and we make sure they don't sleep easy." Back home, I spread the photograph, the copied trust documents from Linda, and Robert's letter on the table. 3 separate threads, all pointing toward the same conclusion. Someone had fabricated a chain of authorization, and they'd been careful enough to think they'd covered every trail. But they hadn't counted on Robert's habit of keeping originals hidden, or my memory for the small, unimportant-looking details. Before the day was over, I called Linda again. "I'm going to need you to keep something else from me. If I go to the authorities, they'll try to intimidate me. I want copies in someone else's hands." She didn't hesitate this time. "Bring them over tonight." As I slid the papers into another envelope, I thought of Pastor Ron's smooth assurances, Michael's casual tone on the phone, and Claire's polite smiles that never reached her eyes. They'd been certain I wouldn't fight. They were wrong. I had proof now, not enough to end it, but enough to make the first move, and I intended to make it count. The map Robert left was clear enough to follow without much guesswork. The X lay just beyond the northern edge of town, where the main road narrowed into a lane bordered by bare trees. I didn't head there first. I went to the church. Pastor Ron's office was tucked in the back of the building, past a hallway lined with photographs of charity events and mission trips. His door was half open. When I knocked, he looked up with a practiced warmth that had soothed this town for years. "Helen," he said, standing to greet me. "I heard you've been unwell." I stepped inside without returning the pleasantry. "I've been busy, looking through some of Robert's papers." His smile held, but the skin around his eyes tightened. "Robert kept meticulous records. Some of those records are about the land. Parcel 18B. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I think I know where this is going. Let's sit and talk like old friends. I stayed standing. I'm not here for comfort, Ron. I'm here because the deed shows changes dated the week Robert was in the hospital. And I have documents originals that say otherwise. His hands rested, flat on the desk, fingers spread. Helen, sometimes decisions have to be made quickly, for the greater good. That parcel was tied up in red tape, the trust was inflexible, and Michael came to me needing a solution. He assured me you were on board. I wasn't. He nodded slightly, as if that was irrelevant. Still, what's done is done. The land is securing a loan that's funding jobs here. You care about this community. So did Robert. I took a photograph from my bag and laid it in front of him. The one with Robert at the table, the clock in the background. Recognize this? He glanced at it, then leaned back. Robert signing the amendment. No, I said. Robert sitting for a staged photo. The clock in that picture has a scratch it didn't get until weeks later. I know because I was the one who polished it after it fell. This is a fake, Ron, and you were in the room when it was taken. For the first time, the pastor's voice lost its pastoral cadence. Careful, Helen. Careful was the old me. I'm here to tell you, I'm taking this to the state land registry and the bank's compliance office. You can explain to them why a church leader was brokering property transfers without the owner's consent. His jaw worked, but he didn't speak. I turned to leave. Helen, he said finally, think about your family. Michael's business is holding on by a thread. Claire's reputation is tied to this loan. If you make this ugly, it won't just hurt the middle, hurt you. I didn't answer. Outside, the wind bit through my coat, but my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. That afternoon, I drove to the spot on the map. The trees gave way to a small clearing, and there, partially buried under fallen leaves, was a rusted boundary marker stamped with 18B. The marker was older than the date on the altered deed. I took photographs from every angle, including one with the day's newspaper for time-stamping. Back home, Ethan was waiting on my porch. Dad's been calling me, he said. He wants to know what you're up to. Then, he's worried, I replied. I handed him the photographs. Keep these somewhere safe. Not at your apartment, not with anyone in the family. He flipped through them. You're going after him, aren't you? I'm going after all of them, but I need more. That more came from Karen at the bank. I called her after dinner, speaking quietly into the phone. I have proof the deed was altered. I need copies of the loan file, everything with my name on it. She hesitated. Helen, if I pull that without authorization, I could lose my job. Then don't pull it. Let me come in tomorrow, and you can leave the right file in the wrong drawer for half an hour. The line was silent for a long moment. Then she said, 10A.M. Don't be late. The next morning, the file was waiting in the third cabinet by the teller stations. I carried it to a quiet corner and opened it. Inside were the loan application, the appraisal, and the collateral schedule. The asset listed for Parcel 18B showed a valuation inflated by nearly 40%, enough to justify a much larger loan. There was also a copy of the amended deed, notarized by an assistant pastor from Ron's church. I slid my phone from my bag and photographed every page. By the time Karen returned, the folder looked untouched. She didn't speak, but I caught the flicker of resolve in her eyes. That night, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. Robert's original trust documents from Linda, the photographs of the boundary marker, the staged signing photo, and the bank file images. Each piece told part of the same story, a coordinated effort to strip my authority and use the land as collateral for a private gain disguised as community benefit. I started drafting a timeline, noting dates, names, and overlaps. The accountant, in me, took over, mapping the connections like a balance sheet that refused to reconcile. Michael's meetings with Pastor Ron lined up with sudden appraisals from a firm Claire had once done consulting work for. Karen's internal memos, which I'd spotted in the file margins, hinted at pressure from higher up to process the loan quickly. Ethan stopped by as I was finishing. You're building a case, he said, almost in awe. I'm building something they can't talk their way out of. He glanced at the pile. What happens when you're ready? When I'm ready, I said. We put this in the hands of people who can't be boffed or shamed into silence. For now, I kept the evidence, divided half with Linda, half in a locked box at the bank under a different branch. If anyone came looking, they wouldn't get the full set. I knew they'd realize soon that I wasn't fading quietly into the background, and when they did, they'd push back. But I also knew they'd underestimated the one thing I'd never lost, my ability to follow the numbers until they told the truth. By the end of the week, I had the numbers. All that was left was to decide when to make them public, and whose name would be at the top of the first report. I kept the evidence scattered, but the pattern in my head was solid. Parcel 18B wasn't just collateral for a loan, it was the lever Michael and Claire had built their latest venture on. Without it, everything they were balancing would tip. And Pastor Ron had tied his own credibility to the scheme. They'd built a structure that looked sturdy from the street, but was hollow inside. All I had to do was push at the right place. The push started with Linda. She'd been holding the sealed envelope Robert lifted, the one that had been hidden in the pendulum clock. We met at a diner out on Highway 6, away from familiar faces. She slid the envelope across the table, her fingers lingering as if it carried weight. "I shouldn't be giving you this," she said. "Robert told me to hold it until you needed it. I guess he thought you'd know when that was." Inside was a smaller packet, a folded map, a brass key, and a single page in Robert's handwriting. The note was short: an address, a date, and one sentence. "If you're reading this, they've come for what's ours." The key belonged to a safe deposit box, but not at our usual bank. The address was a branch 2 counties over. I drove there the next morning. The clerk didn't ask questions. Robert's name was still on the record, and mine was the secondary. Inside the box, wrapped in an old handkerchief, was a leather-bound ledger. The handwriting was Robert's, but the entries weren't about our household finances. They were transaction records, names, dates, amounts spanning 15 years. Several entries matched dates from the loan documents I'd photographed. Others linked to companies Michael had registered and dissolved over the last decade. And one, dated a week before Robert's hospitalization, recorded a transfer of title guarantee to an entity tied to Pastor Ron's church. I copied every page on the branch copier, paid in cash, and returned the ledger exactly as I'd found it. Back in town, I arranged a meeting with Ethan in the back booth of a coffee shop. I slid the copies across to him. "This ledger ties your father, your grandmother's land, and Pastor Ron together. It's clean, organized, and Robert kept it off the books. It's the spine of our case." Ethan flipped through it, his jaw tightening. "Dad won't see this coming." "He won't have to," I said. "We're not going to warn him. But we need to move before they realize the bank file isn't locked away anymore." That part would be trickier. Karen had already risked her position for me once. Asking her to cross another line wasn't something I took lightly, but the ledger gave me leverage. I called her from my landline that evening. "I need the internal audit schedule for loan account 38,749, I said. She exhaled sharply. "Helen, that's confidential. Even telling you it exists. It exists. And I have documents showing the property valuation was falsified. If the auditors see that, they'll follow it straight to the signatures and the notarization. I'm not asking you to hand me files, just tell me when the audit's happening." Silence stretched. "Then, 2 weeks from Monday. That's when the regional compliance officer will be in the branch." It gave me a window, but also a countdown. If Michael caught wind before then, he could restructure the loan, shuffle assets, bury the trail. I needed to pin him in place. The next move came at Sunday service. I hadn't set foot in Ron's church in years, but I walked in that morning and sat in the second row. His sermon was on stewardship, how the faithful should use resources wisely for the benefit of the community. When he passed down the aisle afterward, I met his eyes. "Nice message," I said. Robert would have liked the part about transparency. His smile didn't falter. "We all have a duty to be clear in our dealings. Then you'll be fine when the auditors come through," I said, low enough that only he could hear. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, calculating, not fearful. He understood the implication. That was enough. If he was off balance, he might slip. The slip came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, Ethan called. "Dad's furious. He says you've been spreading lies in the congregation." "I haven't," I said. "But it means Ron's nervous. They're talking." That was my cue to set the trap. I called Michael directly. "I know about the deed, the valuation, and the notarization. I have Robert's ledger. In 2 weeks, compliance is coming to review the loan file. If you want to talk before then, you know where I live." He didn't reply right away. When he did, his tone was cold. You think you've got something, but you don't know the half of it. I know enough, I said, and hung up. By the weekend, Claire showed up at my door. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Michael says you're threatening the family. Whatever you think you've found, it's a misunderstanding. I let her talk, noting every shift in her voice, every attempt to reframe the facts as opinion. When she paused, I said, you used Robert's life insurance to buy your house. I have the bank transfer record. I have the property valuation. I have the ledger. The misunderstanding is yours. You thought I wouldn't check. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't deny it. If this blows up, Michael loses his business, we lose our home, and Ethan will be fine. I cut in. He's not the one signing false documents. She left without another word. I spent the next few days consolidating what I had. Originals and copies went into separate envelopes, labeled and coded. One set went to Linda, one to a lockbox at the post office, and one stayed with me in a fireproof safe. On the Friday before the audit, I walked into the bank and made a withdrawal large enough to draw attention. Karen caught my eye as she counted the bills. She knew I was making noise. That was part of the plan. If Michael heard I was moving money, he'd assume I was trying to hide assets or pay someone off. He'd focus on that, not on the fact that the audit was days away. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the clock ticking in the corner. The brass pendulum swung steadily, the scratch on the minute hand catching the light every pass. Robert had left me the tools to dismantle what they'd built. Now it was just a matter of timing, letting the right people see the right pieces at exactly the right moment. When the auditors arrived, they'd find a file that didn't match the public, records evaluation that didn't match the market, and signatures that didn't match the truth. And when they started asking questions, I'd be ready to hand them the rest. For years, I'd balanced other people's books, made sure the numbers lined up. Now I was about to show them what happens when they don't. And this time, the ledger wouldn't be in their favor. I woke before dawn the Monday of the audit week. The house was quiet except for the steady tick of the clock in the living room. The brass pendulum swung like it always had, but now I knew what it hid and what that meant. Today wasn't the day I confronted anyone outright, but it was the day I made sure every piece was where it needed to be. Ethan arrived just after sunrise, carrying a paper bag with coffee and a folder under his arm. He set it on the table without a word. Inside were printed screenshots emails between Michael and Pastor Ron, discussing clearing title and managing optics before a bank review. I asked how he'd gotten them. He shrugged. Dad's bad at passwords. And he doesn't think I'm capable of anything. The emails were more than enough to link Ron directly to the falsified deed, but timing was everything. If we went too early, they'd close ranks. Too late, and they'd bury the trail. I told Ethan to keep watching Michael's accounts and to be ready to move cash into a traceable transfer. If money started shifting, it would be the auditor's first flag. By mid-morning, I drove to Linda's. She had the second set of copies I'd given her, and I wanted her to hold on to something new, the email prints, plus a notarized statement I'd prepared over the weekend. It detailed my lack of consent for the loan, the forged signature, and the discrepancy in the property's chain of title. Linda read it slowly, then looked up. This will burn bridges you can't rebuild. They were the ones who tore them down, I said. I'm just pulling the rubble away. Leaving her house, I stopped by the hardware store. From the outside, it looked like a pointless errand, but I bought a small motion-activated recorder. That night, I placed it on the bookshelf next to the clock. If Michael or Claire came by unannounced, I wanted every word. The next day, I made my move with Karen. I walked into the bank right before lunch, when she was alone at her desk. I didn't sit. I slid a single page toward her, a copy of one of the emails with Ron's name in the header. I'm not asking you to pass documents along, I said. I'm telling you that when compliance sits down, this will be waiting in their inbox if the loan file hasn't been frozen for review. You can decide whether that's better for you before or after you speak to them. Her hand hovered over the paper, but she didn't touch it. You're forcing my hand, Helen. I'm giving you a choice, I replied, then turned and left. That evening, Ethan called again. They know something's coming. Claire's been on the phone all day, and Dad's making trips to the bank. Let them run in circles, I said. The more they move, the easier it is to show intent. The following afternoon, I got what I needed. The recorder caught Michael unlocking my back door, still using the spare key. I'd forgotten to change, and rifling through my desk drawers, I heard papers rustle. Then his voice, "She's got the ledger here somewhere. Claire, check the clock." Robert kept things in it. There was a metallic click, the faint scrape of the minute hand as he opened the hidden panel. Then Claire's voice, "It's not here. She's moved it." Michael swore under his breath. "She's playing a game she can't win." They left without taking anything. But now I had proof he'd entered without permission and was actively searching for the ledger. It tied him to the knowledge that the clock hid evidence and that he was desperate to get it. That night, I made a copy of the recording, labeled it, and slid it into the envelope at the post office lockbox. I also sent an anonymous email from a public library computer to the regional compliance officer's address, one sentence, audit account 38749, against county land records for parcel 18B. No attachments, no signature, enough to point them in the right direction. On Thursday, Karen called me at home. "They've moved the audit up. It's tomorrow." "Good," I said. "That means they're already suspicious." I spent the rest of the day preparing. The copies for the auditors went into a plain manila envelope. Robert's ledger pages, the emails, the notarized statement, the property map, and a still photo from the recording showing Michael's hand inside the clock compartment. I left out my name from the labels. If they wanted to trace the source, they'd have to do it through official channels. Friday morning was cold and gray. I parked across from the bank and watched the regional compliance team walk in. An hour later, Michael's truck pulled up. He went inside without looking around. I waited 15 minutes before walking in myself, envelope in hand. Karen spotted me first. "You can't be here, Helen," she whispered. "I'm here to make a deposit," I said evenly, sliding the envelope across the counter. "For the compliance officer, direct delivery." Her eyes flicked to the conference room, where a man in a dark suit was speaking to two tellers. She took the envelope, her fingers tight around it. "You understand this could take down more than just your son." "I understand exactly," I said, and left. That afternoon, Ethan came by. He'd heard from a friend inside the bank that the compliance team had pulled the loan file, the property deed, and a set of digital records. "Dad's locked in there with them now," he said. I poured us coffee. "Then we wait. They'll see the numbers don't match. They'll see the deed transfer date, and they'll see Ron's involvement. The rest will follow." By nightfall, I knew the ground had shifted. Claire called, her voice sharp. "What did you do?" "I told the truth," I said, and hung up. The clock ticked in the corner, steady as ever. The scratch on the minute hand caught the lamplight, just as it had the day Robert signed the papers they thought no one would question. They'd built their whole structure on a lie. Now the cracks were spreading, and all I had to do was let gravity finish the job. The morning after the audit, I woke to the sound of the phone ringing. I let it go to voicemail, but the machine picked up Michael's voice, strained and clipped. "Call me. We need to talk." He didn't say my name, didn't say Mom. I deleted it without listening again. Ethan came by before breakfast, his expression caught between excitement and worry. "They froze the account," he said, sliding into a chair. "Dad's furious. Claire's been calling everyone she knows." At the bank, he pushed a folded printout across the table. "This is from the county registry. They've marked the property file for review. That means someone's looking at the deed." I studied the document. The transfer date was circled in red, a date I remembered too well. It was 3 weeks before Robert died, a time when he could barely hold a pen, much less sign legal papers. "Good," I said. "That's the first thread. Once they pull it, the rest will come loose." By mid-morning, I drove to Linda's with the second envelope. This one held the original ledger pages Robert had kept, the ones with the handwriting so precise it could only be his. Linda listened as I explained what had happened at the bank the day before. "They'll come after you now," she said quietly, "not just with words." "I'm counting on it," I told her. "The more desperate they get, the easier it is to prove intent." I asked her to hold the envelope in her safety box. If anything happened to me, it would go straight to the state attorney's office. That afternoon, I went to the church. Pastor Ron was in his office, flipping through papers. His smile froze when he saw me. "Helen, I heard you've been busy." "I have," I said, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. "You knew Robert couldn't sign that deed. You helped Michael push it through." He leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm. "Be careful with accusations you can't prove." I reached into my bag and laid a photocopy of the deed on his desk. Next to it, I placed the photograph of Robert holding the clock. the scratch on the minute hand visible. This photo was taken the same day you claim he signed. He was in our living room, not at the notary's office. And if you look closely, his right hand is in a brace. Ron's eyes narrowed, but he didn't reach for the papers. You think you can take down your own son and me with a photo? I don't need to, I said. The auditors have the emails, the compliance team has the property file, and I have Robert's real signature from the week before he died. They'll see the difference. His jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. I turned to leave. If you want to get ahead of this, I'd suggest calling your lawyer before they call you. When I got home, the back door was ajar. I stepped inside quietly, listening. The living room was empty, but the rug in front of the clock was slightly out of place. I opened the hidden panel empty. They'd taken the decoy envelope I'd planted 2 days ago, the one filled with copies of old grocery receipts. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Claire's voice came through, sharp and cold. We know what you're doing. You think you're clever, but you're tearing this family apart. You did that yourselves, I said. I'm just holding up the mirror. That night, Ethan texted, Dad's moving money again. Big transfers. Looks like he's trying to shift assets out of joint accounts. I told him to forward everything to the anonymous address we'd set up for the auditors. Paper trails don't disappear, no matter how fast you think you can move them. The next morning, Karen called. I can't say much, but you should. No, Michael and Claire are both being called back in today. Separate meetings. I asked if the auditors had everything they needed. They have more than they expected, she said, her tone measured, and they're not happy about what they've found. By midday, word was spreading in town. 2 people stopped me at the grocery store, each with a vague comment about trouble at the bank. I didn't confirm or deny anything. Let the speculation work on them. The less I said, the more they'd fill in themselves. That evening, Ethan showed up again, pale and tense. They confronted Dad about the emails. He tried to blame me, said I hacked his accounts and fabricated the messages. He looked at me, almost apologetic. I told them the truth, that I found them because he left his password on a sticky note in his office. You did the right thing, I said. They'll try to make you the scapegoat, but the dates and the paper trail won't match their story. Before he left, I gave him a small sealed envelope. Keep this with you. If anything happens, deliver it to Linda. Inside was a flash drive with every piece of evidence, labeled and dated. The next day, I went back to the bank, not to meet anyone, just to stand in line like any other customer. When Karen saw me, she gave the slightest nod. A man in a dark suit walked past, carrying a box of files toward the exit. I recognized the case number written on the side. It was the loan file. Michael and Claire were nowhere to be seen. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe the balance was shifting. That night, the phone rang again. This time, I answered. Michael's voice was hoarse. You've destroyed us. No, I said. You did that the day you put my name on that loan without asking. I just made sure someone noticed. He hung up. I stood in the quiet, listening to the steady tick of the clock. The scratch on the minute hand caught the light again. The same mark that had been there the day Robert signed nothing at all. Their lie had started there. It would end in the same place, exposed, undeniable, and ticking down to 0. The hearing was set for 9 in the morning, inside the county courthouse. I arrived early. The clock's sealed envelope tucked in my bag, along with copies of every document Ethan and I had collected. The air was cold enough to bite, and frost still clung to the steps. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the room smelled faintly of paper and dust. Michael and Claire were already seated at the far end of the conference table, both dressed like they were about to close a major deal. Michael kept his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the papers in front of him. Claire leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, radiating disdain. Pastor Ron sat a few seats away, wearing the same calm expression he'd had in his office, as if the room belonged to him. Karen entered last, carrying a thick file. She nodded once at me but didn't smile. The county investigator began by stating the matter. Fraudulent loan application, forged signature on a deed, misrepresentation of collateral assets. His voice was steady, almost bored, but the weight of his words settled into the room like wet sand. He asked me to confirm my identity, then to describe the events in my own words. I kept it simple. I told them I never authorized the loan, never signed any agreement regarding the property. I handed over Robert's authentic signature samples, pointing out the differences: a slight curve in the R, the spacing between letters, I slid across the photograph of Robert holding the clock, the minute hands scratched clear in the enlarged print. This photo was taken the day they claim he was at the notary's office. You can see his right hand was braced. He couldn't write his own name, let alone sign legal documents. Michael shifted in his seat, muttering something to Claire, but the investigator cut him off. "You'll have your turn." Karen opened her file, producing a series of internal emails. She read them aloud, each one linking Michael and Claire. 2 discussions about leveraging Mom's credit and quietly including the lot from Robert's estate. The tone in those emails was casual, confident, like they believed no one would ever see them. When it was Michael's turn, he tried to pivot. "My mother misunderstood. We were securing financing for a business that would benefit the family. She's misremembering events." I didn't look away. "The only thing I've misremembered is how much decency you had left." Claire spoke next, her voice cool. She claimed the insurance money was reallocated to stabilize the family home, not stolen. The investigator asked her for receipts. She didn't have them. Then Pastor Ron was asked about his involvement in verifying Robert's presence at the notary. He insisted he was simply vouching for a friend's recollection, but the investigator slid a document across the tabula visitor log from the notary's office that day. Robert's name wasn't there. The silence that followed was sharp. Ethan entered as a witness. His testimony was brief but devastating. He confirmed he had overheard Michael saying they just needed her credit, not her, and that he'd found the incriminating emails after Michael left his password in plain sight. Michael tried to interrupt, but the investigator raised a hand. After 2 hours, the investigator closed the folder. "We'll be referring this to the district attorney. The loan will be voided. The property will revert to its original title. Any funds dispersed will be frozen pending review." Michael's face drained of color. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. Pastor Ron stared straight ahead, hands clasped, saying nothing. Karen stood, gathered her things, and walked out, without a glance at any of them. That outside, the air felt sharper. Ethan caught up to me at the steps. "It's over," he said, half question, half statement. "For now," I replied. "But they'll have to answer for more than just money." That evening, I returned the clock to its place in the living room. The panel slid shut with a soft click. The scratch on the minute hand caught the light again, the mark that had been there all along, quietly waiting for the right eyes to notice. Looking back now, I see the whole path clearly, from the moment Ethan let those words slip, to the night I found the hidden envelope, to the cold conference room where everything came into the open. Every step was a choice to stay silent or to dig deeper. I dug, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted the truth to sit where lies had been allowed to grow. I've learned something I wish I'd understood sooner. In a family, betrayal doesn't always announce itself in shouts or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes dressed as help, dressed as what's best for everyone. And if you're not careful, you'll nod along until you've signed away your own ground. You can't stop people from seeing you as a resource instead of a person. You can't force them to act with the same care you've shown them. What you can do is keep your records, trust your memory, and refuse to be rushed into a signature you haven't read twice. And when the ones who should protect you become the ones you need protection from, you don't owe them your silence. To anyone listening who's been told they're overreacting, or that family comes first when family is the one draining them, listen closer to the numbers, the dates, the missing pieces. Paper doesn't lie, even when people do. And you're allowed to protect yourself, even if it means standing alone at first. If you've walked through that kind of darkness, know this: you're not the only one. And if you decide to step out into the light, the ground will be there to hold you. Thank you for walking with me through this. If you want to hear what comes next, you know where to find me.